Welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to helping the investment banking community grow through learning from successful leaders. So whether you're interested in learning about investment banking, or you're an analyst or associate looking for advice on career progression and succeeding in the industry, or a VP or senior that's passionate about leadership, you'll take away something from each and every episode. My name is Pete Nieberg, Global Head at Altrum, and my mission is to connect as many of you with successful investment banking leaders as possible. So thanks for joining me and enjoy today's episode. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, Peter Shin here at Stifel in London. Peter has had a rapid ascent to the top, climbing from analyst to managing director in just 11 years. So certainly knows a thing or two about growth, development and success within the industry. His 13-year career in investment banking has seen him take positions at KPMG, Piper Jaffray, Nomura and Mooreland Partners before joining Stifel back in 2019. His expertise is in the TMT space, and he's now responsible for the global technology IB group here for Stifel in London. Peter has advised on many successful transactions, but he also plays the role of staffer at Stifel, so truly understands what it's required to grow and be successful through all positions. He hears the needs and sees the challenges of analysts and associates and VPs regularly, so I'm really excited to hear many of his insights today. Psyched for the conversation, Pete, so welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, and thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for a nice intro. It was nice to be here.
So let's start with you introducing Stifel and what you do for your clients to our listeners.
Sure. So Stifel is a full-service mid-market investment bank. We're publicly listed in the US, based technically in St. Louis in Missouri. Across the US, we provide two predominant functions: investment banking on one side, and then wealth management on the other side. So wealth management, Stifel is one of the largest wealth managers for sort of middle America, in a sense. And of course, that brings benefits when you combine it with an investment banking franchise. Where I sit in London and across global tech, which is our team, we operate across advisory and capital markets for the technology industry in the mid-market. Our definition of the mid-market is generally anything sub $1 billion. So $100 million to $1 billion in EV is our definition. Everyone has a slightly different one. That's where we like to play. That's where a lot of the flow happens, which gives us real-time insight into what's going on out there. In London, in our team, the majority of our business is sell-side M&A. So advising tech clients when they want to exit their business. But of course, we also do capital advisory. So that's ECM and DCM and growth equity financing work as well.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction and helping the audience grab what Stifel do. I'm always interested speaking to successful leaders who've been in the industry 10 years plus. How did you end up in investment banking?
Well, I'll be the first one to say, growing up in Glasgow, I had no idea what an investment bank was when I was at school. But I was always into technology. So I was that kid that, was building PCs in his bedroom, taught himself how to code when he was 5, that kind of thing. I was always passionate about the tech space and wanted to be in it. So, I chose to study computer science at university. I think I made that decision when I was 12. So, tech was very much where I wanted to be. I came to London for university. So I went to UCL to study computer science. Really, the journey into banking was partly London, and I heard about banks being a big employer for certainly grads of the schools in London. But the computer science labs were sponsored by 4 banks. So it was JP, Goldman, Citi, and BAML. Their logos were prominently printed all across our comp sci lab. Of course, you get bombarded to turn up to events, which I did. Eventually, as a student, you think, why not? I'll go. And I went to JP Morgan one way back when. JP Morgan back in 2008 was JP Morgan Cazenove. Right? It's not the giant it is today. And I had a little chat with the CEO of the London business at at the time, Bill Winters, who's the current CEO of Standard Chartered. And, he kind of threw out some things. Tech investment banking was one of them. I didn't know what that was. So I went to look it up. And of course, that jived with my own evolving of my business interests where, while I love technology, I didn't understand the economic world around it, right? So Google was getting into its stride. This was to me a search engine, but for some reason was valued in the billions. I had no idea why. I wanted to understand why. I wanted to understand why tech companies were valued the way they were, and certainly that seemed more appealing than going to work for one, where I'd just be another number in a cubicle somewhere. No offense to those companies, but when you're 22, 23, that you want to do is for me anyway, the way I'm wired, I wanted the most dynamic career that I could find. Of course, that didn't help. Coming out of 2008, 2009 is kind of when I graduated. So, the world changed, but the seed was planted, and I couldn't let it go. So that's kind of how I went into it. And I'm fortunate enough, I started off in tech IB and I'm still here. I've never done anything else within investment banking. It is what I want to do, the fusion of the corporate finance as well as advising companies in my space. Tech, I'm still very passionate about as I was in day one. Would I be an oil and gas banker? Probably not, right? But, I found my niche very early and, I'm glad I did, right? Because it's led me to, very enjoyable and still very changeable and exciting career.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing that. And obviously the marketing and branding on campus and the events help and certainly played a big part in your journey. So thank you for sharing that. Just thinking about the rise of tech, I hear a lot about talent coming into investment banking now versus talent going into tech. What's your take on that? Is it a big competition for candidates at the moment to get the brightest minds into investment banking?
I mean, I think tech has taken on a strange new life. Certainly I'd say more the last 5 years. I've always loved it, but even in the early days of my career, people try to talk me out of being a tech specialist. If you think of TMT, depending on which bank you are and which way around you have it, I've always said it was tech, media, telecoms, but it's predominantly media telecoms back when I started. I think tech was like semiconductors and boring stuff. Microsoft and Apple were not the trillion-dollar companies they are today. So, back then it wasn't the hype. And it was sort of like 2016, 17 onwards that it really started to come into its own, especially from a investment banking side where a lot of private equity money started flowing in. And of course, the rise and I guess fall of the unicorn world, right? So, when it comes to like fighting for talent, I always want, I don't think there's any shortage of it. And I've not seen someone that, was curious about investment banking and then ended up working for Microsoft. It's not something I've personally seen, but that story is much more prominent in sort of the US MBA scene, right? Instead of the traditional, you do an MBA, you go into banking or private equity. I think there people started to want to go work for Google and the new hot thing in Silicon Valley, and that's great. That there was an inbound for that, but in London, I think is still investment banking is probably as competitive as ever. The world's changed, people change, but it's still a rewarding career. Did it have the kind of halo effect that existed when I was at university? So probably not, right? I mean, 2005, 6, 7 was investment banking heyday. So there were a lot of people that I remember going to school with that desperately wanted a career in finance. I would hope there's probably something like that still exists, but I don't know. I'm not close enough to it. But there's no shortage of applicants, even at the grad level. Let's put it that way.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for the insights into that. Before we get into the real meat of today's discussion, why don't you share something with the listeners that's unknown or unexpected, something we can't find online?
I have a license to teach people how to shoot guns.
Okay, wow.
So that's a bit random.
How did that come about?
I've never used it. I used to shoot at school. It's something I still enjoy. Don't do much, but of course, gun laws in the UK are very different, and it's harder to maintain any sort of gun license and things. But yeah, it comes in handy time to time, client events and things like that. But then I have to explain myself, why I know how to shoot guns. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that won't exist in any sort of online version of me.
And is that clays or range or both?
Range is mainly range. although you don't do that kind of shooting for clients. Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed it at school, so it's something I carried on at university and then sort of slightly tailed off, sadly.
As all things, once families get involved and the work life, right? Okay, well, having you been in the business so long and advising on so many successful deals, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm always keen to know, what are the keys to success in deal making for you?
I think probably perseverance. Deals are hard. There's no. I've never seen an easy deal personally. That doesn't mean they're frustrating. It's right. It's just it's not supposed to be easy. You know, you're selling companies for significant amounts of money. There's many stakeholders from the people, the owners, the managers, buyers. Navigating all that is never easy. Of course, depending on your rank, you can live in a silo and make it easier, right? You know, if you're an analyst or an associate, you're not going to be negotiating price. So, but you have your own stress because there's a lot of work to get companies ready for sale or to do buy side work. And the more senior you go, the job changes, the stress changes. You're responsible for price negotiation, client management, all that stuff. So I think just having a diligent mentality, acting in their best interest ultimately, which is what we're there for, and getting through the day to day in the most efficient way possible is depend wherever you are on that stack, right? If you're the most junior guy on that chain, you need to get through the work you need to get through as fast as possible, but in a high quality manner. And if you're at the top end of that chain, then you need to be sure that the advice you're giving to the client is the best advice you can give and in their best interest. So all of that takes a toll. Wherever you are on that chain, just get your head down and get it done. I think that's what I've been told. That's what I do. I think that's what I would tell other people as well.
Perfect. So got that, the perseverance, obviously being diligent, acted in the best interest, and again, depending on where you are in in the business, completing the work to a high standard, etc. Looking at the analysts, really supporting on these deals, not really owning the client side, but playing a big part in those deals being successful. What advice do you have for them?
I mean, for the analysts, I think every bank works slightly differently in terms of how they staff deals and the exposure analysts get. But I would say wherever you are, whether you're working on very small transactions, mid market, bulge bracket, trying to understand the big picture is key. I think you can get absorbed into the minutiae of what you need to do without understanding why you're doing anything, which ultimately isn't helpful for your career. So now you shouldn't waste your time pondering about deal negotiation when you've got a ton of work to do, right? But there's always a balance. You should want to know why you're doing X, and really understand what you're producing, not just churning through X, Y, Z because that's what you've been told. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make is they don't bother with the understanding and they just focus on the producing, which is fine when at that level, but it's not overly helpful from a career perspective, right? And always the guy that understands it will probably know how to manipulate and produce it as well. So being able to think big picture is important, and then try not to get, let's say, overwhelmed by the task in front of you, right? Like it's something I see quite often where the intensity of the deals, the intensity of the work that needs to be done, people tend to spiral and kind of wallow a bit in themselves. I've always been a little, just the way my brain works, I've never been one for that because, in my head, if I spend an hour feeling sorry for myself, that's an hour I'm not working and doing the work. So then I'm even further behind, right? That's just how my brain works. But yeah, I think it's never easy, but when you're in the thick of it, but trying to see through the focusing on the immediate task, see the light at the end of the tunnel, don't despair, push through, and then I think you start to find the time to understand the big picture. And when you're just purely in triage mode, which many people can be in when it's very busy.
Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe I understood it wrong, so please tell me if I did, but it sounds like that prioritization and time management is probably quite key to also getting through that work, not wallowing, as you put it, being positive and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Did I understand that right? Is that fair? Those two skills are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think time management for, if you go right to the start of, time management is critical throughout your entire career, or I would say life. But at the very start, you're coming out of school, you've never really had to manage your time that well, right? You study how you want to study, you have your personal life. It's not, things don't need to get delivered in a work, in any way near the same work context. So the key skill, I think, certainly at the start, is figuring out how much work you can actually do. Like what are the limits of your own capacity, right? And always test those limits, but you need to understand how much you can actually do, and then correlate that to when you can deliver something, and those two working very seamlessly, right? So when you promise to do X for Y time, then get it done. But it's hard to promise that if you have no idea how, piece of work X will take you. So getting good at assessing, with the adequate buffer time and all that stuff, getting good at how you can produce, to what standard, to what time, and scale up or down depending on the criticality of whatever you need to do. That is super key. I think at every level, right, from analyst to associate and on, especially when you start managing workflow, and you're the reviewer and you set works at the associate VP level. Because if you're bad at that, then everybody around you suffers. So the whole system starts to break down.
Great advice. Thanks for sharing that. And is it experience? Is it going through that investment banking apprenticeship that gets you that, or are there other tools that can help build that ability to assess the work or improve in that area quicker?
I'm sure there are, but other tools. But for me, it's just experience, right? It's time served in the trenches, knowing by doing, and sadly knowing by also messing up, right? Like, I was that kid at the start, right? Like overpromised on everything. Like, yeah, I can do it. Don't worry. And then, I'd not go home for 3 days and wonder what was going on. So, it's always under promise, over deliver to the max, right? As well as you can. But you're only going to figure it out by just getting stuck in and incrementally editing what you think is your own capacity and timelines, right? And hopefully you can take on more and more and more. But yeah, there's no substitute to just being in the thick of it, and you will know what your capacity limits are when you have worked a very busy stint. It should come naturally to you post that.
Thanks, Pete. Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about, again, you're a unique guest for us and for the listeners today because of the dual role, the staffer role you play. So let's start off with your knowledge around that. In terms of transitions, what do you see as the toughest transition for investment banking, i.e. from role to role?
Do you mean within the ranks, like from analyst to associate? Yeah.
Yeah, so from analyst to associate to VP, VP to a senior director. What do you see as the toughest transition?
I don't know, there's probably a few key ones to describe, right? So let's take D to MD off the table a bit, because that's a very unique transition, and it's ultimately around fee origination in our world, in my world. I can't speak to anyone, any other systems, but to some extent, everyone will have some sort of fee target to make MD. Fee targets are a unique concept until you hit that zone, right? It's not worth worrying about when you're an analyst or an associate, about how you might make X million in fees one day. So that's a very unique D to MD problem, but a common one. And I think there's part of it is just finding your way with clients. But I think that's a conversation that could take up the entire many days, right, of how you do that. But from the analysts, I would say the early transition to associate is tricky because you start managing work. So you're not just responsible. As an analyst, all you need to worry about is being excellent at what you do and what you're told to do. So you don't need to worry about whether someone else is doing their work properly.
Sure.
And then when you make associate, you will start that journey of reviewing work. Now, not every associate does, because they don't realize the world's changed, but the bar moves from what the expectations are. So, you need to be reviewing work. You need to be setting the agenda, setting the work to the analyst, being able to take that input, guide them, train them, take their work, correct when necessary, and send it up the chain in a timely manner. But you're where the buck stops, right? Not the analyst. So always a good sign of, well, to me, it's a good sign of a weak associate, or is when they start blaming the analysts, right? When it's like, oh, that works wrong. Oh, well, that guy did it, or that to me is an associate not doing their job properly. But they might not necessarily understand it because no one's told them, or perhaps they don't realize that the roles changed. That's magnified up a notch when you get to VP and D, because the workflow you manage just becomes more and more complicated, right? In many ways, I think VP is the hardest rank, because if you do it properly, you're the meat in the sandwich. You need to manage and set work and manage and review down to the associates and analysts, and then you're getting heat from above because everyone wants everything yesterday. So stakeholder management becomes a very key point at that level, and again, the bar moves on, so everyone's expectations of a good VP is higher. So that's kind of why it's always challenging. For me, I've always found it interesting. The role changes, so it keeps you on your toes. But sadly, I have seen my fair share of star analysts becoming weak associates, or weak great associates being weak VPs, predominantly because of that. Like, they don't understand that the requirements and the expectations of them has changed, so they sort of evolve into super associates rather than VPs, or that ilk, where they're just doing more of the same. And that is a little pitfall that I tend to see from time to time.
Okay, perfect. So again, that leadership, and I've heard that from other leaders, that move into analyst associate is a very tough transition because of that leadership, coach, management, extra piece to it, and great stuff on stakeholder management at the more senior level. So let's talk about that transition from analyst to associate, and those skills that maybe need more focus, the coaching, the checking the leadership part. What recommendations do you have for analysts to better prepare themselves for that step?
I think they need to understand that the world changes when I don't want to make a universal comment, because not everyone's afflicted by it, but there's part of the problem stems from when you make associate, you're like, yes, you've achieved something, so well done. And you don't want to do some of the work that you used to do as an analyst, is fair enough. But life doesn't work that way, right? You can't just dump all the stuff you don't want to do on the analyst. So, I've always thought bad analysts breed bad associates, and then who will then breed bad analysts, and then you're in a vicious cycle down. Right. If you're the analyst, hopefully you've got some good associates that you're working for, like that are inspirational and aspirational, and you want to be those people, right? They're the ones that are in the trenches with you, teaching you. They're hard but fair. That you work hard with them. You're learning tons from them. If you find people like that, you will become them when you become an associate, because you will know what it's like to work for a good one versus a bad one. If you've had the unfortunate experience of just working for bad associates, then it's a lot tougher, right? But I think this is why investment banking is very much a mentorship program. You only know what you see. There's no universal experience. My experience is very different to someone else's from my peer group, and then every one of our analysts and associates will probably have slightly different experiences, even within my own team. Hopefully not too different, but it's but try to align yourself with people that are good at what they're doing and that you want to be. I think that's the best advice I could give to someone junior, and understand the responsibility when you become that, right? It's not just, the analyst, when you become an associate or when you become a VP, the people below you aren't just a resource so that you can go home early. They're helping you, but they're driving your agenda. So you should take full ownership of what you're getting them to do. But also remember that someone trained you one day, once upon a time. So no one gets to associate or VP by pure accident, right? They don't just appear. Someone would have taught you something at some point in time. So remember what that feels like. Put in the hours, and there's no point whining about bad people. I think it's train them to what you want them to be. I think that's on the other side of it. So that's what we try and teach here. Is how I've always thought of it. Everyone has a different attitude to it, but I think that's what I found to be effective.
Thanks, Pete. And you touched on mentorship, and I really resonated with me. Align yourself with someone that you believe you want to be like or can help you grow. I think that's really impactful. So let's talk a bit about mentorship then, a bit more detail. How do analysts, associates, VPs, those looking to move up the ranks, how do you align yourself with someone that's good for your career, or how do you pick a mentor? What's your advice in that area?
So this one's tricky. I firmly believe in it because I've always had it. Every firm I've worked at, I've found a natural mentor that that I gravitated towards, and they gravitated towards me, and they've been instrumental in my career, all of them to their varying degrees of how much time I spent with them. But your formative years are the formative years, so they all played a huge role in how I've turned out. Of course, my mentors at my current firm have played the largest in terms of my current career position, but they've all mattered in their own way. I was never tactical enough to go and find one. I never sought it when I was going through the ranks. I think I've always had the good fortune that I've aligned with someone through work, and I think while as important as I believe in it, I think trying to tactically find one doesn't really work, right? The mentee mentor relationship tends to build organically. You can't force two people to care about each other in any meaningful way. But I focused on being the best I could be at any given rank. I think I found my first ones because I was quite obviously a tech geek. I loved the sectors that we worked in. It wasn't investment banking for me. It was tech companies. I was curious. I kept asking questions. I always kind of put my hand up to volunteer for stuff. I think doing things like that, who wouldn't want someone that is an enabler, right? Like if someone's super keen and hungry and wants to be around what you're doing and is super curious about what you're doing, then assuming they're good at what they do, why wouldn't someone enjoy that, right? Like that as a senior person. So yeah, that's kind of where I've had it, from smaller firms to larger firms like Nomura. I've always had someone kind of take me under their wing a bit, and that makes your life as a mentee massively different to just being someone else. They're just being one of many inside of a team. So I've had the good fortune of being brought up that way. I try and instill it as much as I can to our team. And, I think the senior guys in my team, we all share the same values in terms of how we want to treat our staff. But, it's difficult to kind of describe how you go and get one. All I can say is if you have one or find one, then understand what you have and embrace it, because it's rare to find. And if you are in a good fortune like I was, currently still am, that you have a mentor that you really trust and believe in, that relationship should be worth its weight in gold, right? More than X% comp increase that someone else might give you. That's kind of what you hope for in a career like banking.
Well, it definitely touches me what you say about curiosity, taking an interest. It helps it more organically happen. And I like that. And I think that's good advice. Talk to me from a challenge point of view. What do you think are the main challenges facing analysts in the industry today?
I mean, I think the world's changed a bit. It's not really their fault, right? But if you started unfortunately during COVID, I guess you have slightly different views to what investment banking to someone that started a bit before you might have been. So that's its own set of problems. And then I think there's a lot of distractions out there. I guess you could do other things, but I won't put it into. I'm not going to make a blanket statement about Gen Z or whatever it is. But I think it's probably less clear to the current state of grads what investment banking is because of the COVID stint. It's pretty obvious for when I left school, and I think it was probably obvious, very obvious 5 years ago. But I am seeing more people that have perhaps don't really understand what an investment banking career is on day one, which I still find a little surprising because I just assume everyone knows what you're signing up for. And I don't know if that's a COVID influence or whatever. That's the only thing I can put it on. So there's and perhaps people have, because of COVID and the impact it took on people's lives, especially that wave where if you think you're a student and you had a couple of years of uni cut out or late school cut out because of COVID, you don't want to be sat at your desk for a material amount of your postgraduate life. To the slightly more different view than I would have had 13 years ago. So, but that's not to say there aren't people that will do it, but I think it's, my view is it's kind of, that's what you're paid for ultimately, right? It's a lucrative career. It still very much is. I mean, analyst level pay, total pay is considerably higher than when I went through it. And it's more than inflation, right? So, but, I guess the choices are harder. Just to make a blunt comment, I think I remember, when I was at school, the kind of it was kind of a normal view to be like, I'm going to work a good part of my 20s to, enjoy my 30s, right? Or that, I think that mentality might have changed. I'm not saying it's the way that mentality was correct, but it was certainly more aligned to kind of investment banking as an industry than if you want to go and experience everything when you're 23, right? That's not those two worlds don't align. So I think it's that in that sense it's become harder as an industry. But if there is a more specific reason for the change, I'm always still curious to try and learn and understand myself, other than being like the old guy and being like, this is Gen Z problem. But yeah, that's kind of where I've tried to deduce what might have changed, because it still should be as interesting and still certainly still very lucrative in the in your as a career. But you're right in that it has certainly changed from an outlook.
Surprises me you say it, I guess, as well, because internships you'd think would give you a good grounding into what you're getting yourself in for. And I know that's big within the industry, so it's an interesting topic. What about for associates? What do you see as the biggest challenge facing them?
I think associate is usually kind of where you start to really cut your teeth, right? Going into VP. So, it's more of a context of, do they want to be, what are you in banking for? Is it just, you're past I've got a couple of years experience, done, I can go do something else, or do you want to try and go all the way? If you try and want to go all the way, or certainly get to VP and beyond, the work to that starts at associate. Arguably it starts before, but there's no point thinking about VP when you're an analyst. So and sometimes that's frustrating, right? Because you've gone through your analyst years, you've made associate, and then you're again at the bottom rung of a different ladder, right? And you need to keep pushing forward. And the job, arguably until late VP, just gets harder and harder in many respects, because you're responsible for more, less of the pure hours for yourself, but more the management, which causes more stress. Is inherently more stressful trying to keep 10 plates spinning in the air than just being focused on one plate, which is your own workload. So that's a hard decision to make, because no one wants to plan out the rest of your career, right, when you're only 3, 4, 5 years in. But that's kind of when you need to make your play and start pushing even harder, right, to get up those ranks. And that from a marathon perspective, that can be I'm sure that can be frustrating at times, but it never gets easy. So I've never I never it didn't bother me that much. But even an MD is not easy. So but everyone's expectations of what life will become when they're that next rank up will change, is different, right? So keeping yourself motivated through the journey is certainly difficult.
Okay, thanks. And for VPs, we know that when you step from VP up into managing director, the relationships are so key, particularly on the client side. Any advice for those VPs looking to build a bigger network, prepare to step into that MD role?
My advice would be to get out there early, right? Don't start picking up the phone and calling people when your rank dictates that you should. I started doing origination calls, going to conferences when I was an associate, not because I chose to, actually, just I was forced to by my mentor. So. And I'm glad he did, because I don't think most people are naturally wired to be pure networkers. Some are, right? And some are very good at it. But a lot of people force themselves to figure it out and get good at it. But if your first experience of cold calling a prospect and get into a conference by yourself in a different country, trying to get a couple of $1,000 worth of conference fees worth out of it, then do it when you're young and you don't have the pain of needing to be good at it immediately, right? If you start at director, I think it's too late. Almost, so assuming your firm enables you, start and be sensible about it, right? If you're a VP, don't call the partner that your boss knows. Just call the VP guy at firm X. You'll grow with them if everything works out. So try and come at it that way. Get into, go and have a coffee, go and have a few beers. It's London. Everyone knows everyone. Get to know your peer group, and do it in a more organic way, right? Than hey, what are you working on, and I'm working on X, and we could be helpful to each other. I think everyone kind of implicitly understands that you might be helpful to each other at some point. But my view of networking is that always you're never going to be helpful to someone you hate or dislike. If you naturally bond, then try and get to understand, meet people, talk to people in a like context of just, hey, how you doing, and then you'll start to feel more comfortable about kind of origination type conversations when they need to happen later on in your career. But I felt it when I was doing it as a VP, early VP, late associate. There was a massive barrier in my internal barrier in my brain to start prospecting, and I had to force myself to do it. Turn up to a conference and be like, oh crap, I'm here for 3 days. I need to come back with something useful to say. Whatever drive, gets you doing that. I mean, for me, it's, sheer fear, but when I was back then, but you can get doing it without that kind of pressure, then great. But just start doing it, and don't be desktop guys, when you're sort of a mid person, because especially as we're starting to see, right, if execution work starts to slow or change because of the macro environment, then it's important now more than ever when people aren't fully in the trenches cranking. There's more time for all of this, so you should make use of it.
Perfect. So, and networking comes up again and again as an important skill to have in the industry from speaking to other leaders. Love your take, start early, get out your comfort zone, get on the calls, go to the events, and you'll build relationships. And again, it's come up in other episodes about building relationships at your level, because they will become senior. And if you built the right relationships, they will yield some success. In terms of building successful relationships, you mentioned, going out for a beer, getting to know people. Any specific tips you'd give the audience to build strong, long-term, successful relationships?
I don't know. I'm still. I'm only 13 years in, right? So it's not like it depends on your definition of long. But look, there are certainly people that I know very well and people I know less well, but from a professional standpoint, know well enough. I guess find people that are like you. That I guess you can form a. It's not outside the question why you can't form friendships, right? For people, there's probably a decent chance that most people in finance, whether they're in banking or PE or whatever, flavor you sit on, might be wired in a similar manner. So try and have those conversations. You don't have to, right? Like everyone's slightly different, but I always found there's people that I enjoy spending time with, and we can talk about anything. And that's we can talk about our own careers, our own firms. We can talk about what they're working on, what I'm working on. That could be help, and then the stars align if you work on together. I think building relationships purely for a specific outcome is probably where people start to get cynical. You're only calling me because I'm on the board of X, that kind of stuff. Certainly in private equity land. So it's a long game. You're gonna be people you don't like. There's gonna be people you get on with well, but you just need to be, just get out there to know enough people, and and it's connecting the dots. It's not just, oh, I met that guy 5 years ago at some party. It's, if there's a work value to it, then it requires effort. But that's what banking is, right? You can't just turn up and say, hey, give me your business. If you've not been helpful to them, then why would they choose you over the next guy who might have been around for 5 years? So yeah, you don't need to be that tactical, but be helpful to each other. Don't always say what's in it for me, and be surprised at what comes coming round to you at the end of the day.
Definitely. Thanks. And are there particular, for those in TMT now or soon to be in TMT, are there particular events that you recommend that are good ones for building that network out?
Not really. I mean, the industry conferences are always helpful, but they tend to be very specific. So it's not like a TMT conference or a tech conference. There's certainly the larger ones. There's Money 2020 if you're interested in fintech. Of course, I think you should do this as when you're sort of a mid-level person and above. There's MWC if you like comms. CES in the States, which is more consumer tech, hardware tech. These are like massive conferences. But I think there's tons of specific sector aligned things within tech. I can only speak to tech because media comms know what I do. But that you can go on, it's usually a 1 or 2 day event. I think it's the experience of going to one call is helpful, even if it's generally frustrating. And doing it as a VP level person, or just to kind of blow the cobwebs out. Just put yourself in the jump off into the deep end and hope you can figure out how to swim at the end of the day. Because doing it lightly is always like not that hard. It's not that difficult to go with it for a beer with someone in London, and things like that. That's not going to challenge you in any drastic sense. But jumping on a plane, going to a conference for a few days, spending foreign money should hopefully give you some stimulus to that you're very much outside your comfort zone, and you go and try and force yourself to figure it out. And everyone will have their own style and how they approach this stuff. So I think that experience is key.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about culture now. We know it's vital for all thriving and successful teams, and the leaders play a huge role in the culture. How do you feel IBD culture or investment banking culture has changed over your career?
Well, so I've never been a big proponent of bank culture. It's one thing every bank talks about. I don't think it's one thing, I'll get myself in trouble here, but I don't think it's one thing any bank has, to be honest. Unless your bank is one team, like a boutique, like my old bank, right? That's different. And this is why I say that, right? I take a big role in the culture in my team, how we operate, how we want the team to operate, and the values we instill. That works for me. That works for my partners at the MD group, and how we want to operate our team. And it's a collective effort at the top, right? So the MDs are all working together to instill the kind of team environment that we want. But, I have no idea what Stifel Tech Germany is doing. There's no one right way to operate a team. So yes, there's like core values that comes top down, but ultimately I think the cultures that you find in banking are at a team level, and it's operated by that team. So if you take very large banks like Bulge, I can almost guarantee you that, well, I can fully guarantee you how TMT operate and how healthcare operate and how industrials operate, and that, right, it's all different. And I've never experienced or met anyone who would say it's all the same, because people only tend to know what they know, so they're inside their teams, right? I've not met anyone that's bounced across 5 different sectors within the same bank, so I could be wrong. But so I think that's, you can only take care of that, for instance. So the kind of universal bank culture, I think, is a slight myth that is always talked about. Other than that, I don't think the culture has changed too much. There's always a slightly more aggressive version. There's a slightly more, let's say, entrepreneurial version. There's a chilled version. I don't think it's for me to say there's one right way. There's the way we try and do things, but if that doesn't work, for other people, then that's fine. It's important to find whatever style that works best for you when you are going through it. So when you're an analyst, when you're an associate, like if you don't like how your team is operating and you don't want to be a part of that and you don't believe in their vision, it's not going to change on account of you. So move. Find something that does work and jive with you. I know that sounds kind of blunt, but you can't operate. There's no culture that's going to fit everyone, even our own, right? That will. I think I'm doing things okay, but what works for some people in my team will not work for others, and that's just life as a manager, right? Of people. So all you can do is what you think is right, and find the people that it works for, and that works on the other side as well. Like if you're not excited by the prospect and you're not inspired by the people that you're working for, run it out for as long as you want to, but they won't change on account of you. So if you want a different experience, then you need to go and find it.
Perfect. Yeah, and I agree with you fully. Not everyone's going to fit the culture at any given team, so finding the right one where you can do your best work is key. What type of culture have you built? You talked about top down. You talked about values. What's the culture that you fostered within your team?
I would hope that if you asked any of them, it's one of sponsorship and empathy and trust, right? I won't stick people in a title box and, be like, oh, why is this an associate coming to talk to me? Or I don't care what a VP has to say. We don't operate that way, which, yes, there are titles, of course, but we try and be as flat as possible in terms of approach. Empower people. Like if a VP can run a call with a client, go for it. Doesn't have to go through me. That's not ultimately my job to do the day-to-day everything. So I need to think about the big picture. So I'd say there's 3 pillars in how we approach the team. So the baseline is, of course, find talented, hungry, ambitious people. Give them intellectually challenging work to do. That's pillar one. Give them a good team environment that they like to be in, because rightly or wrongly, well, it's probably wrongly, you're going to spend more time with your colleagues than anyone else in your life, right? So, you have to give them a good place to come do that. And then the third pillar is pay them as well as you can. Ideally above market, but if you're doing well, then they should benefit and enjoy in your success, because it's collective success. And my approach to it is, if you have those three things in balance, then people that have met me, people in my team have heard me talk about this before. But if you have those things in balance, then you largely remove many of the reasons why people might want to move on. All the exciting work in the world, terrible team environment with no money doesn't work out, right? Great team environment with no money and terrible work doesn't work out. All the money in the world for boring work and no team also doesn't work out, right? But if you have these things in harmony, then when one of them maybe falters, you're okay. If you enjoy your team and you're having a good work environment, you like what you're doing, the work's exciting, but hey, there's a crash and you have a bad year and the money goes down a bit, then that you're not going to run to the door and get out, right? You care about all these things in balance as well. Likewise for the other two, whichever way round you want to do it. The money might hold, the work's interesting, but maybe some people leave and you're going to be a bit more stressed in the work environment. Yeah, that's okay. That's not a reason to rush to the door. So that's the mentality we have as a group. We try and instill very much a legacy of Mooreland Partners, which was how the partners ran the team there in London, and Stifel acquired us. So, that in London, that's not changed much in terms of our approach. Try and find people that want that. Right now, not everyone does, and that's okay. So it's trying to get the two to match is always the tricky part.
Thanks for sharing the pillars, and it certainly resonates with me and makes a lot of sense. You touched on spending a lot of time with the team and the team environment. We know the investment banking industry is very demanding. How do you manage culture effectively as a leader whilst considering the demands of the business and the client?
I think it's like anything. Balance doesn't mean equal spread of hours. It's just finding the moments you can, right? So what does that mean? That could be, hey, there's this critical mass in the office. It's 8 p.m. on a Thursday. Does anything need to be done for Friday morning? No, then you're an adult. Like, let's go for a few beers. Let's go trying to find those moments in time, even when things are very busy. I think is key. And I'm not around all the time. Neither are the MDs, and that's fair enough, because that's our job, to get on the road and win business. But so the culture stuff matters. You lead from the top, but you need to instill it to the people on the ground as well. So if I'm not around, and I can rely on my director, and he's not around, then he can rely on the VPs. Someone is doing it, even if no one's. If it's just the analysts and associates, then hopefully they do it themselves. And I think from what I hear, it happens. And that's what I like to see. I don't need to be there all the time. I just want it to happen, that people can be sensible, and deliverables all need to be done on time and to X quality and all that good stuff. But especially when you're busy, it's too easy for everything else to go out the window. And that's when you start to fray, I think, having gone through, a remarkable 21, which I'm sure many of my peers in the industry went through as well. It was a crazy time. It was busy as hell. And then finding the moments and time to kind of let off steam and just enjoy each other's company, because you're having a unique experience, right? It's hard certainly for loved ones and other halves and family, unless you are doing this, it is hard to understand what the toll it takes. So there should be a common bond in the people in the trenches together. And, you could just enjoy each other's company as part of being in the trenches together. And hopefully you like each other's people, and you can let off some steam. And I think that's when it starts happening, when you're not around or someone's not forcing it, then I think that's generally a good sign that it's working.
Definitely. And I guess you touch or leads into work-life balance a little bit. Any advice for work-life balance for our audience?
I mean, there's no balance. Balance is what you make it, right? Well, let me put it that way. I think it's a misunderstanding of what balance is. If you want equal weighting of priorities and time to your personal and work life, yeah, that's going to be tricky, right? It just doesn't work. But you need to find balance in whatever ways you can. So, I can only describe how I did it. So what worked for me when I was more junior was, I'd kind of write off Monday to Thursday. So I'd work all the hours in the world in those days, and I'd try to buy myself a Friday to go see friends and have some personal time, and then I'd mop up anything I needed to do over the weekend. That's kind of my general cadence. Doesn't, of course, that's very easy when it's just you as a single person. It's a lot harder when you need to factor in other people, but when you do, you just need to do the best you can, right? When I'm on leave I'll give you an example story. Like, I don't know if it's going to put anyone off, but a few weeks ago, and when we started talking about this, I was in Dubai for a week with my wife, and then I had a client emergency when I was there. So, she got to, make time at breakfast, enjoy each other's company, and she could relax and enjoy the sun. I do some work, she goes to bed, and I keep working, right? To the point of, I was sat in a hotel lobby drafting documents on my own. It sounds, it might sound horrific to some, but it has to be done. There's no one to outsource that to. They're calling you for your advice. You can either say no, and client goes away, or you just get in there and get it done, and try not to affect the rest of your life as best you can. It means you suffer, of course, but that's the life you chose. I've only got myself to blame for being angry at the situation. That's I know what my job is and what it requires from time to time. Of course, I have an understanding wife,
Helps.
and you need people around you to be understanding. But yeah, I mean, I think it's finding those little snippets of ways to let off steam, to unwind, and it doesn't have to be like I need to take 2 weeks off and go to a beach, right? Whatever works for you. If it's just you just want to sit at home and play video games or watch movies, do it. Whatever keeps your brain sharp, keep you sane. If you want to, I have a colleague that runs marathons for fun. But that works for him. That's like I'm sure a big part of it is stress relief as well. So finding the however way to maximize your time and enjoy what you can while combining it with the demands of being good at banking. It's difficult, but it's by no means impossible, right? It's just you need to find a balanced cadence that works for you, and it's always going to be tough, and no one's going to enjoy the harder times of it. But and what works for me doesn't work for the next guy. But that's something you also need to figure out pretty fast, kind of how you work mentally, so that you can find whatever balance works for you and what doesn't work. So that by the time you're in your later years, you've kind of figured it out a bit, and you know how to push through and keep going, especially and unwind and recharge when you can.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. Thinking now, with everything you've learned and been through and know, if you could go back to Pete on your first day in the industry as an analyst, what's the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I don't know that I would, to be honest. And I say that in the context of the mistakes I made that might look like a mistake in hindsight are part of, why I've turned out the way I've turned out. So, if I gave myself some tactical advice for how to avoid that X or Y, then maybe that would change how the experiences I went through and ultimately how I turned out. And I'm okay with how it turned out. So I think, yeah, I mean, and that's part of it, right? You need to make those mistakes. No one's going to have had a perfect run to the finish line. You want to make those mistakes early, sure, and when they're non-critical, but they still need to be made. So, no, other than I would say it's worth it, right? It's worth, it's still a very, well, let's put it this way. It's more, I've been in investment banking longer than I ever planned to be, if you ask me as a grad, right? Because I wasn't thinking that far ahead. Being set as an MD is not what my goal was on Analyst one day. I don't think it's anyone's goal on Analyst one day. Just surviving was my goal. But it was the right decision, I guess, in the times when everyone is self-respective and need to think about whether they're doing the right thing. But I was probably a little too stubborn in my own view to care too much about these things anyway. But yeah, I wouldn't change my experience, because it's led me to where I am today, and I'm enjoying where I am today.
Nice, love it. Well, I can't believe we're reaching the end of today's show, as we only have a few minutes left. So I wanted to start with the wrap. For those listening who want to get more of you, Pete, how do they best connect with you?
You can add me on LinkedIn. I think that's send me a message, and I hope that doesn't explode my my LinkedIn box. Yeah, I think just that's probably the easiest way. Just send me a message there. Say hello. I hope you don't. You're not all massively offended if I don't come and meet you all for a coffee. Like you'd be surprised by the kind of random inbounds and very forceful inbounds that you get sometimes. That people are like, "Are you free for a coffee tomorrow?" Probably not. But and like I'd say it's more about, look, if you're interested in a career in banking, more specifically, if you're interested in joining our team, then by all means reach out. And I'd put it that tactically. I think if you want my life to use on things, then sadly I'm probably a little too busy for that. But and I guess the advice to those guys is, and whoever's listening, is just try and figure out what everyone at the MD group gets. It's hard, right? And as team managers, is try and also understand the situation from the other point of view, instead of the kind of me thinking that is sometimes prevalent, right? And ultimately your career is what you make it. You can't blame anyone, or you shouldn't. It's not someone's fault that this didn't work out or that didn't work out. Find your niche, find whatever works for you, and run hard at it. But no one's going to hand you it. So it's very much earned. And I think that kind of self drive is key to, if you want to go all the way, to push yourself, because that's how everyone did it essentially. No one got gifted it. And yeah, I know that it's probably not the kind of joyful message to everyone, but yeah, there isn't, and nothing worth having is easy, right? So part of who you'll become is from that journey. So even in the hard times, even in the when things are the bad and you're really in the trenches, try and see the good in it. Try and see what you're learning, how you're evolving, because it has to happen whether you view it in an optimistic light or not. Right? If you wind yourself up about it, then it's just, you're gonna just hurt yourself. So see the good in the bad, and enjoy the good when it's there. And I guess best of luck to anyone going through it. If our paths cross, whoever's listening, then come say hello.
Perfect. And I think you've given enough advice across this podcast. And for those that connect with Pete's cultural pillars that he has at Stifel, then you should definitely reach out. Final question. I'm a strong believer that successful leaders are readers, not necessarily books these days. There's tons of other materials such as podcasts out there. Anything that you recommend that's had an impact on you?
I do. I just started a book. What is it called? Let me find it. It is called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It's a good book. It's kind of about hardship and striving through adversity.
Okay,
I'm a
cool.
non-fiction man. And I've tend to enjoy books about leaders in my world. Steve Schwarzman's book is great. Ray Dalio, these guys have all written pretty insightful books. They're not divine truth. Just take them for what they are, and learn what you can from them. If you want some entertainment, in financially related entertainment, anything Michael Lewis writes is pretty excellent. The Liar's Poker's guy. I think I've read all of his books. But yeah, I mean, finance is ultimately a people business. Yes, we deal with numbers, but you're down to people. And when you get M&A deals done, and investment banking business done, it comes down to people. So read about the people that have done it before you, the people that have different points of view on it. Use that, spin it in your own way whenever you need it. But it's a very big world out there outside the narrow view of finance or investment banking. So I'm with you. I think reading is a big plus in terms of just your outlook on life, and the perspectives that you can gain seeing the world through someone else's eyes, which is how I read nonfiction. Right.
I like it. Some good titles there, and we're going to add them all into the show notes for the listeners. And I love the idea about reading from other leaders in the industry and learning from what they've done well, and probably some of the mistakes they've made as well. So that's great. Pete, really enjoyed today's conversation. So thanks so much for your time. I appreciate how busy you are and how busy you've been. You shared the story recently about your holiday. So really excited to listen to the episode back. I know there's going to be a ton of insight here for the listeners, and I'm sure they'll take away as much as I have. So thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's a good thing you're doing, a great thing you're doing with the new tech and forum. It certainly didn't exist when I was going through it. So hopefully, yeah, whoever's listening and get the perspectives from the people on this. Say thanks to Pete and learn from it. And best of luck in your own individual journeys.
Thanks, Pete, and best of luck with those transactions this quarter as well.
Cool. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for joining me today for the Investment Banking Leaders podcast. Today's episode was brought to you by Altrum, the global leaders in commemorating your most important transactions with a meaningful deal toy. So if you have a successful deal to celebrate, hit me up or the Altrum team at altrum.com to get your design started. I really enjoyed connecting with Pete, and he shared great insight for us all. I particularly loved his views on time management and how critical it was for success within the industry and life. His advice was to assess how much work you can complete in set timeframes. Really know your capacity and then set deadlines based on that. And be sure to under-promise but over-deliver. He says it takes a bit of experience, but in time, you'll learn, you'll be better equipped in this area, and you'll be a much stronger member of the team for it. I liked his views on finding mentors. It really resonated with me. He shared, align yourself with someone you respect and want to emulate and learn from. Really show an interest in them. Volunteer, be curious, ask questions, and you will build the relationship really organically. He also shared some good stuff about networking, where he said it's best to get started in the associate role. It will help you progress your career better. He said get involved in origination calls, go to networking events, get out of your comfort zone. Doing it early builds the skills and prepares you for leadership later on in the industry. I also connected with his views on the culture at Stifel and the 3 pillars and how that builds and has had a lot of success for him and his team. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I'm sure you have many of your own takeaways as always. Join me again for the next discussion with a successful investment banking leader. You can find us where all great podcasts live. Follow our page, share with those interested, and until next time, best of luck with your transactions.